Okay, good morning and welcome to the ECOM 2020 webinar. First of all, apologies for this small delay due to a small technical problem. Well, I would like to thank the municipality of Cascais for the invitation and for being here with you. We are having a session in this morning focused on the theme of the new mobility and the opportunity for urban and rural regeneration. So we'll have three guests, three talks in the morning, but from Wipke Unhaun, Melanie Schade and Andras Eskes. But first of all, we'll have Jorit Nitschitz, and apologies if I haven't spelled the name correctly, so he can make the presentation. But briefly, I would just would like to make a brief presentation of this session. As you know, and probably we are all thinking about the future and the need to think about a new mobility and the adoption of these new solutions, these active mobility solutions for short journeys, and to try to find solutions to encourage walking and cycling. This is crucial for the moment we are living. Of course, this group and this debate will focus on urban and rural generation and to see, and we'll try to discuss how they can help us to think about these new forms of mobility, of course, including not only the cycling, walking, but also these new electric vehicle technologies and new urban logistic solutions. So this is more or less the topics that we are going to discuss in this morning. I will introduce Jorit and ask him to make the first presentation, the opening session of this 1.5 hour session. Jorit, it's your time.
Thank you, Jose. Dear viewers, welcome. My name is Jorit Nijhuis. I'm the Dutch representative of the IPOM board. And I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the IPOM board and the whole conference organizing committee to the 5th debate of the ECOM 2020 in Cascais. Also a warm welcome to Jose, our moderator, and our 3 speakers. And for those joining us again in this 5th debate, welcome once more, or in my best Portuguese and fitting with the conference team, outra vez. So, the IPOM board, including myself, was very sad to have to cancel the ECOM 2020, but also we are very glad to have this series of webinars as a good alternative. And the idea behind these webinars is also to have good input on the next ECOM conference, which you all know will be held again in Cascais. So I think the discussion that we will be having for the next 1.5 hours will be very fruitful and very insightful for the next ECOM as well. So myself, I work at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Public Works. Yes, I'm sure for all of you, as it goes for me, is that the COVID-19 crisis has seriously altered our line of work in transportation. I am personally also involved with dealing with the COVID crisis and thinking out how it changes mobility. And we are also in the process of making agreements with universities, with large companies on working at home, limiting mobility, stimulating bicycle use and walking. So on the one hand, you could see the corona crisis has led to a serious impetus for mobility management. So it's a good driver for mobility management. But on the other hand, it is also a blessing in disguise for sustainable transport. The public perception of transportation, especially public transportation, has structurally been damaged, and we can see already that car ownership and car usage is on the rise. So I think, yeah, it can go multiple ways, and you can see that mobility is in a changing state. And that also fits very good with the theme of this 5th debate, new mobility, an opportunity for urban and rural regeneration. And the focus in this debate is on new forms of mobility and new functionalities associated with public space. And it also links perfectly with previous debates, such as the webinars on mass, on nudging, and the future of mobility. So I'm really looking forward to having this debate, and also looking forward on the presentations that we'll be having by our next three speakers. So I'd like to wish you all to have a fruitful discussion on this very important topic, and hope to see you again on the sixth debate and the final debate. I'd like to thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Jorrit. Well, we are living difficult and very hard times. And Wiebke, we expect a lot of what can we do with our streets in the public space. Yesterday, I was also participating in another debate with Mike Leiden, and he was talking about the experience of this tactical urbanism movement in the United States and all around the world to make the streets for people. So it's really one of the topics, and the hot topic nowadays. And I think the cool streets issue is really important. So I will give you 10 minutes to present the session, okay? And then we'll, in the end, we'll debate with all three, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my screen? Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation to give a presentation today on the last year's project here in Vienna on the cool streets. And it's not only a last year's project, as I'm going to tell you in the end of my presentation. So there is a really good perspective on this project. So it's still going on. The Cool Streets is a project to return public space back to pedestrians, cyclists, to residents, and it's also a project for climate change adaptation in the surrounding of the residential areas. What was the initial point for that project? Vienna has a strategy on climate change adaptation in the urban area because they are suffering from urban heat. So we surveyed that in certain questionnaires in the last years. For example, quite a few people asked if they are suffering from the heat in the hot summer of 2015. And there were more than 1/3 of the population said, okay, this summer was very hot and we were really suffering from that. And even last year in 2019, which was also very hot summer here in Vienna, we asked at special heat islands in the city center, and there almost 2/3 of the people said, okay, this summer was too hot for us, so we were really suffering. The outlook says that there will be more hot summers in the next year, so we are going to have more than every 4th summer day to be a tropical night or a hot day in Vienna. So we expect that more inhabitants of the large cities and also in Vienna will seek for refreshments. And what else we have in Vienna is we have quite a dense population structure. So we have, especially in the inner city area, only few green areas. And we have quite a lot of old houses where you can establish so many, for example, window shades and so on, because of the conservation laws. So the idea grew up of the cool streets, one measure for climate change adaptation. So what are those cool streets? So in last summer, the vice mayor of the city of Vienna, she is also responsible for climate change adaptation in the city area, chose 3 of the hottest places in the city of Vienna where we have quite a lot of vulnerable groups there. So especially a high share of the elderly in the population and also high shares of children. There, certain sections were chosen and declared to be cool streets. The special thing with it is that they shows areas where they have certain green infrastructure in those dedicated heat islands. They made them car-free, so that means no parking there, no entry, no exit for cars in this area. But yes, for pedestrians and playing on the roads was allowed during that pilot, and also cycling was allowed in that area. What else happened there, as you see from the images? They put some furniture, like benches, in the streets where the people could sit and meet up. And they also established some temporary spray showers and other water sources where the kids were able to play, where they gained some refreshment by the pouring water. And certain events were initiated in these areas. In the beginning, it were rather events that were initiated by public institutions, like cycling classes for kids, for example, because in these very dense areas, they don't really have the opportunity to cycle on the streets, on normal streets. And but later on, also residents started to organize some events or drawing classes for kids, or gaming or theater or things like this. So the whole action was evaluated by us. So we did quite a lot of interviews with about 518 people in these 3 streets. And we asked them about their acceptance of the cool streets and how often they visited the streets and so on. And so I only want to give you a brief view on the statements about the cool street. And here, the most important one, actually, I think, is the second last on this graph. It's about how much the people are bothered by the fact that there are no parking spaces anymore in that area, because this was one of the most worries of the organizers of the cool street, that the people say, oh no, we can't give you the parking spaces because we got other serious problems. So we found out that during that time, 90%, almost 90% of the people say, okay, it's quite fine. We are not worrying about the lack of car parks in these areas. And we also see from the graphs that there quite a lot of social activity happened there. So they understood the cool street as their living rooms or as a place to meet up with their neighbors. There were also a bit of worry that the people maybe feel disturbed by quite a lot of people hanging around on the street and chatting there and playing music and so on. But in the most cases, this was not the case. We asked them also in these 3 cool places if they want to have the cool streets again. So 92% of the residents in the cool street said, yeah, they want to have it again. And this year in spring, we had another representative survey in the city of Vienna, where the people stated with a share of 70% that they think that cool streets are good ideas. And more than half of the Viennese would like to create more cool streets. And as I already said, we did this cool street also because of the climate change adaptation option. And there were climatic tests in 2019 during the period of the cool streets, and they found out that the ambient temperature there in the cool streets could be reduced by up to 5 degrees. The most effective activity was to remove the cars, because they're kind of small little heat pieces in the street, and because of the water which was sprayed there around. So what we learned from that, it's that we gained a high commitment for the cool streets. So really a successful experiment to return public space to pedestrians and residents. It was used by them. If you see from the images on the right-hand side, one of the 3 cool streets last. So it was completely reorganized now. It's a bit like a little green island in a really dense populated and really hot area. They put some really robust furniture in there at low cost actually, but they closed it for the cars. Cycling is still allowed. There's on the right hand side, there's a school, so the people can, the school pupil can play in that area. They can enter the school building in a safe way. The parents can meet up there on the benches and when they pick or drop up the children. So it's actually it was an initiative with a perspective. Yeah, and if we think about the Corona crisis, actually we learned about the importance of the public space and the use of the public space by walking and cycling. So in Vienna, we still have a really unequal distribution of public space. We have two-thirds of the road space is allocated to car use. Most of the sidewalks are not in the width that we have in our quality standards, so they're much lower, much smaller. So it's really hard to pass each other there with a distance of 1 meter. And it also proved the need for attractive public space, not only for motorized movement, but also for active mobility, for cycling and walking, for the residents, and of course also for the social interaction between people within a safe distance. So what is next? Yesterday, the first of 22 new cool streets were opened with a really big public event in the Hasener Straße, which was also a cool street last year. So the cool streets are an offensive approach for climate change adaptation. There will be 22 others in 17 districts, so the feedback was quite good. So that quite a lot of district managers decided that they want to have own cool streets in their areas. And 4 of these cool streets were permanently redesigned with new tree plantings, with lighter asphalt or concrete, and furnitures and shades and water elements and so on. But in these areas, in these 4 areas, which are permanently redesigned, so where we don't only have this experimental character and this pilot character, there still driving is allowed, and you're also allowed there to park. Yeah, and actually I think this is a good idea and a good way to bring back public space to the residents of the city. And I'd like to thank you at that moment, and I am looking forward to your questions later on.
Okay, thank you, Wiebke. It was really, really interesting, your presentation. Just a brief question, then we will have the debate later. But the promoter of this initiative was the local authority, the municipality, right?
Yes, it was the vice mayor of the city of Vienna.
And you were involved in this as a researcher, or also a part of the conceptualization of the idea?
No, I was part. We did a kind of a scientific monitoring of the processes. So I had interviews with the people there, how they like it, as well in a standardized way, and also in a quantitative way. And yeah, we took pictures, we documented what activities the people liked, and so on. So it was the monitoring process. The
monitoring process. Okay, thank you very much. Well, Melanie, now we're going to the rural part, the rural areas. So it's quite interesting. We don't have in this kind of usually in this kind of webinars the rural mobility issue. So it's really, really interesting that you bring this subject to discuss. So you'll have 10 minutes to present your session about the mobility management in rural areas, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Melanie Schade. I work for the German Federal Institute on Research for Building, Urban Affairs and Spatial Development. I would like to talk to you today about mobility management in rural areas. So as José said, rural areas are often not so much discussed. So the background for this project I want to introduce today is that rural areas are affected by demographic change more than other areas. Also, in rural areas, we see a lot of developments that there's a lack of financial resources, and services of public interest and social infrastructure are disappearing, so that people who live in rural areas often have to travel further and further to go to those services and go do everyday shopping or go to the doctor. So in Germany, we had a project, which is a pilot project, and it was about the long-term security of services of public interest and mobility in rural areas. In this project, 18 model reasons were chosen, and I'm going to show you a map. So this is Germany, and those yellow areas are the 18 pilot regions in Germany which were studied. So you can see they are all over Germany, and they have different sizes. So in these areas, there were quite a difference in population size, density, and also size. And so we got a good idea about the transportation issues in those areas. So the regions, they did a lot of research before they started to look at mobility measures. So there was a reachability study done. So it was looked at how far do people travel to go to the doctor, to go to public services, or to do their everyday shopping, go to school, and how can they get there? Do they go with car, or do they have to take public transportation? Is there even public transportation? All of this was studied. And after this was studied and we had a good base of data, there was a lot of public transportation to look at what are the needs in the population, who needs to travel. So a lot of times, especially students and adolescents or senior citizens have to travel by public transportation because they don't have access to their own car. So these are the groups we needed to have targeted mobility management measures to help with their mobility. So the map, I just wanted to show the map so you can see where we studied. So it was very apparent by talking to the population and doing public consultation that the needs are very different in each area. It was very interesting to see that there are also quite a lot of differences in the acceptance of different measures. So some of the measures I want to present are, for example, to put together different services. So in one area, bus was implemented, which drives on an on-demand system. So the community already had a very good system, a call system, so that people could call for police or emergency services. So this technique was, or the technology was also used to get calls from the population who needed to go to a doctor and have efficient routing, so that there's not too much wait time and people could go where they needed to go. Or, for example, benches, so different benches where people could sit on, and there are different areas they could go to. So, for example, if somebody needed to go shopping, they could get a ride with somebody who's living in the area. But this was not accepted everywhere at the same level, because in some areas people knew each other and they would do it. In other areas, they were afraid to go in a car with a stranger. But those benches, there were also digital solutions, so where you could sign up for a service, so you knew who would travel with you and you would travel with. Other areas were also just a matter of disseminates the information better, to get the information out what kind of mobility services are in the area, and that they could probably replace a car trip, and that there are other options to travel within the community. Also in rural areas, because the distances are quite far, it's important to look beyond the municipality and the boundary of the municipality, because sometimes even though people live in one municipality, it's nearer to go to the next municipality to do your shopping or go to the doctor. So they had, so to speak, cooperation areas where different municipalities work together and also develop measures together that the population could go and access the services very efficiently. And also one example where I'd say it's very important that you speak, or that one speaks to the population, was an example of a party bus. So the idea was to fund a bus that would collect students or young adults to go to a party. And in some areas it was successful, because then also parents knew that the children were safe, they were collected and brought home again. But in other areas, the young adults said that they don't want a bus, because they had a system where they would take young students with them and collect money from them, and they fund their car with it. So it was very different in different areas what kind of measures were successful. So overall, we can say from this study that there are a lot of different measures that can be implemented also in rural areas to help with mobility. But it's really important to look really at every single local circumstance and see what the demand is, what the population needs in order to help with the mobility. With the COVID-19 pandemic, so we heard it's a bit worrisome, the development, because like I said in the beginning, some of the social infrastructure is already disappearing in rural areas. But if we see that a lot of shops are closing down, if this now happens also in rural areas, so that could mean that distances can be even longer in rural areas that people have to travel. So I think the situation is exacerbated by COVID-19 could be. So measures need to be done to help, to continue to help with mobility in rural areas, also in light of the pandemic. And like Jorrit also said in the beginning, the car use is on the rise. So there are more people driving the car again, because it seems safer than being in public transportation. So one of the worries is also that a lot of the good work that has been done over the past years in mobility management, changing behavior, can be reverted now, because if people go back to their cars, it could be that this can stick for a long time. So I think there's a really interesting debate we need to have in the future on that as well. So that was my contribution for today.
Thank you, Melanie. Wow, really, really interesting also. Well, you know, here in Portugal, and I imagine in a lot of places in the world, we are discussing the need to go back to rural areas. People concerned with the coronavirus, they are thinking of leaving highly dense city centers and to live to more less dense areas like rural. Are you having also this debate in Germany?
Yes. Yeah, so there is some of the debate as well, because more denser areas, so there were more cases that there is a the rural area looks already more looks a bit more attractive because there's more space and less cases of COVID-19.
Okay. In the end, we'll discuss it a little more. Well, thank you very much. And finally, Andras, we are more or less in the same topic. We are going to discuss highly remote areas and the mobility in the highly remote areas. Also, it's a quite interesting issue and not common also. So you have 10 minutes to present it, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is András Sekés. I'm the managing director of the company Mobilissimus, and I would like to share you a sexy DRT system on the hilly remote areas of the city of Zalaegerszeg, which is an interesting testing period and interesting topic. So Mobilissimus is a mobility planning and consultancy company based in Budapest, and we work a lot on different local and international projects, and we do a lot of strategic planning. Also, we are working with the renewal of public transport networks in several cities, both in Hungary and abroad. And we are raising because we are convinced that it's very important to get closer the mobility and the new challenges of the mobility to the users and to the potential clients of soft mobility modes. We have developed several sums, and also we have the sum for the city of Zalaegerszeg, which is a 61,000 inhabitant medium-sized county law city in Hungary, quite far from the capital of Budapest, more than 200 kilometers. And it's a city among hills and valleys. And Zalaegerszeg had the first SUMP, so Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, besides the city of Budapest. In 2016, we described that there is a lack of good public transport coverage at the remote areas, hilly areas, quite far from the city center, and it must be improved. We tried to solve the problem by a more integrative public transport network in 2016, but unfortunately, this new plan hasn't been introduced yet due to different, mainly political reasons. But at that time, we developed the basis of the new DRT, so demand responsive transit system with minibuses. So we had the plans a couple of years before. The idea of the Zerge, because the name of this DRT minibus system is Zerge, is based on the city name Zalaegerszeg, which is often abbreviated ZEG. So we defined that Zerge is a good idea because Zerge is a small animal, chamois, going uphill, downhill, and it's a very specific, not for Zalaegerszeg, but for other hilly areas. So we had the opportunity to develop the Zerge project under the Interreg Central Europe Share Place, which is working on remote areas mobility solutions. And the city of Zalaegerszeg and also Mobilissimus are partners in the project. We had more than 1 year, almost 2 years long preparation period when we described all problems and potential solutions. We described there are very narrow roads, hilly roads, and there is a lack of public transport with quite long walking distances. It can be 1.5 kilometers, and on hilly, narrow roads, it's not a pleasant journey every morning and every evening going to work and back or to school and back. And that's why there is a very high level of motorization, which is an unfavorable situation. And we wanted to convince the municipality to introduce a new public transport system on the area, because the level of mobility poverty, so this kind of exclusion from the mobility services, is quite strong. So after a long preparation period, we launched the service on the 6th of November 2019. And we had around 6 weeks of test periods on 3 lines, Z1, Z2, Z3. So Z is Zerge. And the service was still the time free of charge. So it was very popular. And we used stop points instead of fixed stops because the flexibility is a very important factor of this bus system. And we used 2 buses of 15 places, so very small buses which are adapted to these hilly, narrow streets. And we could plan equal timetables for the 3 lines with 7 departures a day on weekdays and 4 departures on weekends. And of course, we tried to organize the best connections possible to the local buses in order to get a good connection solution to the public transport. Despite the fact that the actual public service had a quite bad reputation with a quite bad passenger information system, we wanted to start the improvement of the all public transport by the Zerge system. And we developed, I think, quite good visual elements with maps, with very visual and very easy to understand timetables and with all information needed for the booking and for the registration and for the use of the Zerge minibuses. So you can see we developed different colors for the 3 lines, for Z1, Z2, and Z3. So it was a very good solution to identify the lines and the services. We had to use an online system for the registration and booking process, and IT partner developed a web page to be able to make the registration and the booking for every journey, because we were convinced that it's very important to book to the services, because the bus has only 15 seats, so overbooking is not possible for these lines, and the driver got immediately the right number of people for each stop, the people getting on or getting off. So it was an absolutely live connection between the driver, the dispatcher, and also the passengers. So after 6 weeks of testing period, it was a very big customer satisfaction, because, and in public transport, it's not a usual thing to get a very high level of satisfaction with positive emails and with smiling people who got a bus after 30 or 40 years. They were very, very happy. So we had more than 2019 we had 2019 passengers in 2019. And what is very important, that 60% of the bookings were made online, considering that in such a hilly and remote area, or having quite elderly people and population there, I think it's a very good result. And those people who started to book via cell phone, later they moved to the online booking. Of course, there were different passenger demands on the 3 lines. That's why we had to modify the demand, the offer upon the demand. And we experienced also that not only retreated people and students started to use the bus, but also those people who went from home to work, and they find that it can be better for them than the car use, partly because of parking problems in the city center. And where we are now, we wanted to plan the second testing period for the spring 2020, but due to the pandemic, this testing period was temporarily frozen. And as far as we see, we will start it by the second part of August. And that time with 4 different lines, because we will include a new area into the service of the Zerge system, and we will use bigger vehicles. So it will give a more comfortable and more capacitive service after August. And finally, we really hope that this service can be integrated after the second test to the public transport service contract, because it would give the complexity of the service. So we prepare this project not only for testing twice 6 weeks, because it's very important, but it's only the first step. But the municipality has to find the financing and complete approach, how to integrate it to the normal bus system and how to finance it. You will be able to download a short video from the Ecom web page, I think after the session, where you can find the first days of the first testing period. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very open for your questions.
Well, thank you, Andras. A really interesting, also interesting case. Is this just a brief information? This system is close to Budapest? No,
it's very far. It's more than 230 kilometers away from Budapest on the western Transdanubian region. So it's closer to the Slovenian and Austrian border.
Okay, just to understand it better. Okay, thank you. So I will call the also Melanie and Vipka. I will begin from your presentation, Vipka. Well, it was really, really interesting, and I would like to know a little more about and the case that Andras and Vipka presented. They were interesting because they show the importance of testing solutions. As you know, we are not used to make this kind of temporary projects. So in most of the cases, we invest a lot of money building cycleways or being public transport systems. And we haven't found yet the importance of experimenting solutions. And I would like to know a little more about the case in Vienna, because, well, there is the, I would like to understand what was the motivation. Well, you mentioned the problem of heat, which is crucial, but was that the discussion included in a more broader planning discussion about the city? What was that a more detailed discussion about only the problem of climate change? Why I'm making this question, because there is in some of the cases, the potential of these very small tactical solutions is really limited, because you cannot solve the climate change or the heat problem in a city making very small solutions, though they are the small beginning of change, but we need to have a broader perspective. So my question is, is this solution or this project included in a broader perspective of thinking of urban mobility in Vienna, or it is just a solution focused on the climate change problem and the heat problem, especially in the city center of Vienna? Can you develop a little more about the project?
Yes. Actually, it's a mixture of both. So our vice mayor is responsible for climate change and mobility, or sustainable mobility in the city of Vienna. That's why we have this integrated approach. Mm-hmm. I agree that small scale experiments or intervention don't have that huge impact for the whole city, but they are the first step into the door. So as you see, in the first year, we started with 3 streets, and this year we have 22. And there are certain other activities happening at the moment, which are either on the page of climate change adaptation or on the page of fostering sustainable mobility. For example, we started with quite a lot of encounter zones in different districts. It depends a bit on how far the district representatives want to go. So I also saw in the chat that there was a question about why the permanent streets don't have these limitations for cars and for parking. So it always depends a bit on how far the district responsible persons want to go with. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's much easier to have a temporary limitation for car use than one which is for the whole year. Yeah, actually.
Yeah, and you know, here in most of the cases, when you take some parking spaces from the cities, it's really, really hard measure. You know, it's politically.
It's the same here. It's definitely the same here. And even in these 4 streets where they have this refurbishment of the the street design, even there they reduced the number of cars and parking spaces. Mm-hmm. So even there was already a challenge and a step forward for traffic calming.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel that this context of COVID or post-COVID, it will create a better mood, a better environment, and political and social environment to help this kind of change? Because we have mixed feelings, you know. Yesterday, Mike Leiden was telling that even in New York, where people are at home, the number of cars passing through Brooklyn Bridge is higher nowadays, higher than the last year. And people are at home, still at home. So the figures are really concerning about the getting back to cars. And the pressure of cars in city centers will be really hard. And at the same time, people are afraid of using the buses because of the possible transmission. So do you feel that in Vienna you're having, witnessing a change of perspective or not in this COVID period?
Yes, we see it. But for example, if you look at the people traveling around and everyday mobility, we have somehow the same split. Actually, we have a really high share of public transport in Vienna. So we have almost 70% of trips are done by public transport, walking and cycling, and only about 28% is car use. But what we see is that we have an increase in car use, and we have an increase in walking and cycling, and we have reductions in public transport use. So this is a serious problem. But I think that the people got used during the first weeks of the corona crisis that their streets are a bit calmer, that there are less cars on the street, and now they feel much more stressed by the numbers of cars on the streets. And I think this is a situation the city government is using now to implement new strategies for sustainable mobility.
Okay, thank you, Vibka. I have here two questions from the audience, and I would like also to if you could comment. The first is related with if the experiment was meant to exclude cars from the coolest streets, why do these permanent streets still allow cars?
Yeah, this is what I exactly said before. So these are 12-month projects. So they are lasting for the whole year. I mean, we have in summertime, we have the situation that we have less traffic in the city and also less car traffic, and the pressure of parking spaces is not that high as we have in the rest of the year. So because it's holiday seasons and so on. And these 4 streets, they last for the rest of the year and the next years also. And we have a traffic calming there, but we have no restrictions, or not a completely restricted.
Yeah, but
area.
the period increased from 1 month to 3 months, I think now, right?
Yeah.
From the second phase.
Yeah, in the temporary cool streets, it's 3 months now. So the summer quarter actually, and but 4 of the streets stay for the rest of the years like this. So they were really rebuilt with all technical infrastructures and things like this. And they have reduced car parking there also, of course, because they had to implement all this shading infrastructures. Yes.
Yeah. And the last question I have here also, it's really interesting, is the question is, are these cool streets isolated, or are they part of an integrated and connected network? If they are close to each other, or if they are spread around the city center?
At the moment, they are isolated, but it is planned to have a better interconnection between them in further stages, because we also have a strategy. As you probably know, we have a mobility agency of the city of Vienna, where we have the advocates for walking and cycling in there, and they are working on pedestrians networks and things like this. So, for example, one of the streets is already an existing cycling street, where we have already a linear connections between city districts, but very often they are strategically chosen because they are shaded, because they are in areas which are dedicated heat islands in the city, because it's exactly, especially for the local people there.
Okay, Vibka, well, thank you very much for your presentation and your comments. So Melanie, the issue of rural areas is really important, and as we were talking previously, we are looking at and seeing a new perspective of looking at rural areas, because most of the people are concerned about their urban lifestyle. They are looking for more low-dense areas to live in the future eventually. And I would like to know a little more about the study that you have developed, because is this part of a public policy of a local or regional or federal government? Or were you looking only at the several solutions that you have in the field, but they are not really part of established public policy?
Yeah, so the project was 3 years ago, and it was.
Can you speak a little louder, please? Because
oh, okay, yeah. The study was in 3 years ago, and it was designed to really help and look at areas that are most affected by the demographic change. So it was to help those areas. But now we have a strong policy in Germany which looks at equivalent living conditions, and that's a federal policy. So after the project which I introduced to you, we have now a subsequent project where we basically took some of the findings. So the findings were that there are a lot of measures for mobility management in rural areas, and the lack is not to find those measures, but to implement them across the board. So we have now a subsequent project also within the policy frame of equivalent living conditions, which looks at to organize and bring all those mobility management measures together for rural areas and make them accessible for the people who implement them. And so this is, it's very nice to see that something bigger came out of the pilot project, which we had 3 years ago. Oh, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, exactly. In some of the here in some of the research we have developed here in Portugal, we are looking also how can we combine this kind of mobility systems to rural areas with itinerant services or with digital services. In some cases to avoid the travel, in other cases to support, well, to take the services to the places and to have some kind of systems like Andras was explaining. In some cases we can take the doctor, or we can take the library, the mobile library to the places. Do you have also this kind of combined solutions to take services or to help with digital communication to give access to services, in some cases avoiding the travel to the places or the city centers?
Yeah, so in this pilot project I was presenting, it was also to secure the services of public interest. And I was just focusing on the mobility management aspect of it. But in the social services, for example, there were some pilot projects that nurses would take electric cars and go to patients in rural areas, and also to have digital solutions, like you said, that you can call a doctor or have this medical advice digitally, and also to have more digital access to mobility, for example, with information and calling services when you need them. So you have to have more on-demand services as well. So yes, that was also looked at the digitalization, and also how to combine other services with mobility.
So you can have an idea, how many people do live in rural areas in Germany? Just have a perception. Do you know more or less the figures? Are we talking about 10% of the people?
No, it's way more.
More than
yeah,
that.
I don't have the exact number, but it's about 40% at least. It depends on the definition you take.
Exactly. Well, one final question from the audience here. and it is related with costs, of course. And the question is, do you think if the fare-free public transport would be a solution to attract more people to public transport in rural areas?
Well, there are different opinions on that. Of course, on the one hand, free public transportation would help get people on public transportation, but there needs to be a lot done before this can happen, because the infrastructure needs to be in place, the buses need to be in place, the bus drivers, and because the service needs to be attractive, because if people use it for free and it's not, it doesn't serve the need, then it doesn't have a long-term effect. So I think there needs a lot to be happening before this can have a real effect.
Well, there is also an aspect that is related with the level, the administrative level, who plans this kind of networks. Because in some of the cases, you need a level which the municipality cannot organize it by their own. Eventually, you need intermunicipal systems, in some cases, regional systems. So in Germany, how do you have this kind of rural public transport organized? Are they provided by municipalities or with the upper levels of administration?
It depends on what kind of public transportation. So you have the really local municipal public transportation with this, which is within the boundaries. Then you have also a cooperation between public transportation providers, where you have basically an area of different municipalities who provide a service together, which also crosses the boundaries of the cities and other municipalities. And then you have the hierarchy, for example, the trains, which go throughout the country. So you have 3 different levels, and there are different transport providers. So it's always important that they work together, so that if you take, for example, the municipal bus and you go to the regional transportation network, that you don't have to wait too long. So it doesn't matter which level you work with. The cooperation is very important.
Well, thank you, Melanie. In the end, we will organize a more free talk and especially focus on the future. So now, Andras, I would like to ask you. Well, it was really interesting, the system, and I mean we are not used to see a lot of testing with public transport. Nowadays we forget the value of experimenting, because it's very important when you want to make investments, or when you want to organize a new offer to communities, to show them and to test them first, and to see how they react to the offer. So my question is, you make a good balance of the system. And the issue is, why did you begin to test it? Why do you feel that it was important? Was this answering a demand from communities? Was this a part of the local authorities or the government pushing or making it, asking you to make this kind of solution? What was the motivation to create this offer? Just so we can understand it better.
Yeah, when we started to develop the SAMP in 2016, we described that there is an absolutely unequal public transport service level in the different areas of the city of Zalaegerszeg. Mostly on the outskirts and remote areas have a much lower public transport service, or even there isn't any service, or there wasn't. And we wanted to understand why there isn't, and wanted to understand what are the needs and the demands coming from the local people, from the residents. And it was a very simple story, because they answered at the municipality level that there are hilly, narrow streets and only a few people living there, and we wanted to demonstrate, no, it's not a few people. There are many thousands of people out of the 60,000. So it's not a good solution, and there are flexible, potentially flexible services and smaller buses which the city could use. But after it was a problem how to finance it, because it's quite expensive to maintain a public transport service in such a city. And fortunately, the Share Place project was a active background for developing and testing such a system. That means we could have many personal discussions with the residents. We made test rounds on each potential lines, and even more, we had to repeat some of these test rides because people were so happy. So they invited their neighbors, their friends, the other members of their families or classmates and so on. So it was very popular, and they waited when this project will be implemented. And unfortunately, a public administration system is very, very slow in reactions. So why we arrived to the point when everything was procured, there was a bus operator, which was fortunately the same than the local bus operator, which is in fact a national company. And we had to develop the complete IT system. So it was quite a long process, because there isn't any product you could buy or use from a catalog, because in Hungary it's not an everyday how to operate the ERP system. So it needed a quite long time. And after it proved that it's very important to serve these areas, because those people are equal to all other people living in the other parts of the city. So I think that the decision-making levels, so the politicians understood why it is good and why could it be also beneficiary for them. They were happy. They were present when the complete system was opened and launched for the test period. But now the COVID interrupted this process a little bit, because they are in a quite big financial crisis, how to operate the complete city, how to operate the public transport. And sometimes we feel they consider that this Zerga is something, an unusual part of the public transport system, and we could live without it. And we try to convince them that it's not the case. After the second test period, they are obliged to integrate to the service, and we can implement them a new and more flexible local bus system and network and services, which could completely cover the extra cost of this Zerga. So we find how to finance it.
Yes, the sustainability of the system is crucial. And most of the audience, the questions were related with how can you finance or get a way to finance these kind of systems? Because well, I don't know what. Can you give us an idea of the costs of this kind of the solution that you of this project? What was the global investment? What are we talking about? Because in some cases we spend a lot of money to build roads, and the part that goes to the public transport system, in some cases are it's a very small amount of money related with the money we spend on making roads and highways. Can you give us some figures about the budget related with this project, and how are you expecting to finance it in the future?
What I can say is that due to the Share Place, we could cover the preliminary costs and the first 6 weeks of operation cost of the project and of the operation of Zerga, which is a quite exceptional situation. But it was very good to test everything and to understand how such a system is can operate and can be kept up after the testing period. For the figures, usually in such a city in Hungary, the cost of the public transport is worse and worse year by year, because the frequencies are quite low, the networks are traditional, and the people are unhappy with the service, and they will leave at the very first moment to the personal car use. So it would need a completely changing mobility mindset, not at first from the user's point of view, but from the decision maker and the politician point of view, that it's something which is not a low-level social service. We have to position it as a real alternative. That's why normally they don't use the best buses, and the frequencies are lower and lower if I compare what was the system maybe 10 years before. But around 1 kilometer of running cost of such a minibus, with the cost of the driver and everything, it's around €1. So it's not a big amount. Around 60% of the running cost of a normal bus in the city of Zalaegerszeg, because the fee of the driver is the same, and there are many fixed costs you have to pay. So I think the additional value is if you integrate it to the public transport system, and you can use with a new type of ticket, so you don't have to use a new ticket when you change from one bus to another, because unfortunately in Zalaegerszeg it's still the case. Like that, it's not an attractive story, because why to pay around €1 more if I change after 10 minutes to another bus? Nobody will use it like that. But if you have to integrate it, that it's a continuous or a lengthened system to the normal public service, and you can use it with the same ticketing system. And I think it's the key for the further operation, that with an attractive ticketing system, you can do it. And you mentioned before the potential of a free public transport regarding to Melanie's project. I consider that it can be a solution below a certain city size, but there isn't a good answer if it's good or bad, or possible or not. I think that it can attract many new users, and it can also lose existing users who will change to the car use or to something else if some others will appear on the system. So in this case, I'm not convinced what would be the good pricing and ticketing policy.
Well, there is also the question related with when you're talking about rural areas and as isolated communities. They have a lot of old people, and in some cases they have some kind of difficulties to communicate, to use internet. So do you think that the info exclusion issue is a problem in your system? You mentioned the figures related with people using internet and mobile phones to book the tickets. But do you feel that was a problem? Nevertheless, you feel that was a problem, and if you think so, how are you trying to solve it?
I think the exclusion, it's not that. The exclusion, if you don't provide a service for these people living in these areas, what we experienced that some of the potential users were afraid how to use it, but we held several fora, and there was a very good communication as how to give the information for all users and potential users. And surprisingly, around 60% of the users changed or started with the online booking. So the digitalization level is surprisingly high in such an area, and I think it's a very good basis for further systems like that. And for those people who are less conformed with using online platform, they could call the dispatcher and they could book the journey not only for the next journey, but for 1 week ahead. So maybe let's say that every weekday at 7:28, they will use the line Z1 from this stop to that stop, and he or she will be booked for these services. So it was very, very easy to understand and to use. We didn't experience any IT proficiency problems that caused the exclusion from the service.
Okay, thank you. Well, now I think we have only 10 minutes to end this session. So I will go back to Wiebke again. Well, it's more or less the same question for you three. Where you were discussing very interesting and proposals and projects, but all the three projects, they show that they are trying to change the status quo. And you are trying to change and to invest in areas that you don't have political pressure, or you don't have social pressure. Right? You're talking about rural areas, or we are talking in the cases of the city center of Vienna, to take cars from the public space. And so to make the things that the politicians, they are not keen to do it, or unless they are in some way pressured or pushed to make it. So my question, Wiebke, is looking in this post-COVID period, what kind of recommendation you would like to make so this kind of the cool street program could be spread and could be not only a temporary solution, but a more permanent solution? So what kind of recommendations would you like to make, not only to Vienna, but to other cities that are looking to this kind of tactical and solutions and proposals to make them more strategic or more structural, and not only periodic, but more temporary, not only temporary, but also permanent in time?
Actually, I think that experiments or temporal changes have big opportunities for continuing changes, because especially during the COVID period, we have quite a lot of pop-up bike lanes, we have additional encounter zones or pedestrian zones and things like this. But also we have, in normal times, for example, we have construction areas where the traffic is limited to a certain degree. And I think these are the right moments to show the people what is possible, and then to integrate them in permanent changes, because people learn to compensate, to cope with the change, even the motorized drivers. And you offer new potentials for walking and cycling, for example. I think these are, in this type of like life-changing moments for the road or the traffic participants, where you are able to change their behavior and to make things acceptable. You would not make acceptable if you start from zero or from nothing, actually. And I think this is a chance that should be used. And what I learned from our today's session is also that we in Vienna, we have a bit of the problem that we have a kind of cannibalization between public transport, walking and cycling. And actually, we should use more the synergies between all these three, and then cannibalize from the motorized individual transport.
But do you think that there are what we are feeling from these times, that we are, in most of the cities, we are accelerating things. We are accelerating projects. The cities that are making the structural change, they are not beginning to do things. They are accelerating. They are making things that were more or less projects. They were already done, and they are getting more support. And I think Vienna is one of the cases. Do you feel that these times and these projects and the moment that we are living is pushing things, or do you feel that most of the plans for getting cars from cities, for instance, are they putting in the priority of the public policy agenda? Do you feel that is happening in Vienna or not?
Yeah, definitely. So we have an SUMP in Vienna where we have the target to reduce motorized individual transport to 20%. So there is a broader strategy behind it. And I think these pilots are opportunities to try something. And actually, if you're working with pilots, you're not always so much limited in your regulations and things like this. For a pilot, you're a bit more allowed to do things and to test things. Certainly, if the people, as the policy and decision makers learn that they are working and that they are accepted and that they are not running risk of losing the next election because of that, then I think this is a good way to implement change.
Thank you, Rivka. Thank you for your comments and your presentation. Melanie, I think the question is pretty much the same. And well, the question was made by the audience, but I would like to underline it because the question is, what are the short-term solutions, especially in this period of COVID, to increase the public transportation in rural areas? So if you had to make recommendations, and even in this short-term and more low-budget solutions, what kind of recommendations would you like to give us?
Yeah, I think it's important in a way.
Can you speak louder?
Yeah, I think it's important to make use of some of the trends we have seen now with COVID-19. I mean, there is also on the one hand the increase in car sharing, but on the other hand, also the increase in public transportation, not public transportation, but active transportation measures, car, bicycle sharing. So I think it's a good opportunity not only for rural areas to support active transportation more, but also to think about the resilience of the system, because the pandemic shows some difficulties we have. If you think about the distance that has to be kept, so public transportation is very limited in the amount of people they can transport. So I think it's really in the short term to look at what are the needs in the areas and how can we have flexible offers to help people with mobility. So not think about a big bus system or transportation system, but more of the flexible alternative mobility measures that are probably easier to implement.
Do you feel that in Germany, this period is pushing these kind of solutions? We're looking at Berlin. Berlin was really active in making the pop-up cycleways. And do you feel that this time is pushing also the government and federal government to support, because we need money to do these kind of
So in Berlin, I saw a report on it, and they were saying some of the pop-up bicycle lanes are some of which were already planned in the plans to be permanent cycleways. So my hope is that it will speed up the process and that there will be more room for active transportation.
Thank you, Melanie. Hope to see you soon also. Andras, so your last comment related with this post-COVID period. What recommendation, what suggestion could you make, not only to your system, but to other places, to other rural areas in Europe? What recommendations could you leave us, or could you give us to implement these kind of solutions?
Yeah, I would leave a little bit the city of Zalaegerszeg and even more also the rural areas, because I think there is a very important common problem is the lack of trust. So we have to increase the level of trust toward the use and the safety and the safe use of public transport. And there are several very good examples also from Vienna, how to increase this level of trust and how to make the people more confident to the public transport. We are, as Mobilissimus, we are the secretariat of the Hungarian-speaking CiviNet network, so the so-called Magyar CiviNet, which tries to collect the smaller and bigger cities around the given mobility topic. And we had twice an online webinar around the COVID pandemic situation and the relations to the use of public transport, also from the passenger point of view and from the operators and authorities point of view. And we see from not only from Hungarian, from European cities, that the most important problem that during the pandemics, many companies, many authorities lost 80 to 90% of the passengers. It was quite similar, but the most important question now, how to regain the trust, and there are absolutely different ways. And we see in bigger cities that the increase of the car use is much bigger than the increase of the use of public transport. So there is an inequality actually, and I think we have to put more mosaics one next to the other. So offering a more attractive ticketing system, opening new large public spaces and spaces for using bicycle and projects like Vipka presented for us today. And all these mosaics together could increase again the trust. But as far as we see, it will be a very, very long and very expensive process. And for smaller cities, sometimes it's even worse because there are smaller distances, and also it's true for rural areas. There are smaller distances sometimes, and less level of service because you don't have a bus every 3 minutes, but you have a bus once an hour or something like that. And it's a very easy decision why to choose the car. And if you cannot really offer a useful and potential alternative, I think it's a quite bad sign for the future of the share of the different mobility modes.
Yeah, I agree completely, Andra. Thank you very much also. Well, Beatrice, I think that's it. I would like to thank Vipka, Melanie, Andras, and Jorrit for the great session in this morning. I hope to keep in touch with you and to know more about these projects that you have presented. And Beatriz, well, congratulations to the municipality of Cascais, to Paulo and Robert Stussy for all the organization effort. And well, thank you for all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.